The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, CHD. It's a sad day. We learned yesterday that a friend to CHD, Charlie Kirk, an extraordinary young man, was assassinated. He was speaking at a college in Utah and was shot. CHD grieves with all of us and with his family. It's a tragedy that this can happen. He loved the health freedom movement. He loved the work of CHD. We were talking with him about coming to our conference in November. He was very eager to come. I was recently on his podcast and was honored to be there. Not everyone agrees with everything he thought. Who cares? That's the beauty of free speech and the First Amendment in this country. It's a tragedy that he was killed. We hope that his murderer will be held to account, and we pray for his family, his wife, and his children. Thank you.
Good morning, Children's Health Defense. Today is Thursday, September 11th, and it is my great honor and pleasure to have with us today Gavin de Becker, a great friend to CHD. I want to tell you a little bit about his background, but we're going to talk about his latest book shortly. A little background: Gavin is a three-time presidential appointee whose pioneering work in criminology has changed the way our government assesses risks and threats. A New York Times best-selling author, his books include The Gift of Fear, now published in 28 languages. His 600-person consulting firm has advised many government agencies. And the book that we're here to talk about is Forbidden Facts: Government Deceit and Suppression About Brain Damage from Childhood Vaccines. Gavin, welcome.
Thank you so much, Mary. Thanks so much. Good to see you.
Likewise. So this is a book that I know you've been working on for a while. And what's such an amazing facet of this book about something very tragic, about brain injury to children, is that you've actually made it funny, Gavin. Tell us how you did that, because honestly, I've never seen anything quite like it.
Well, I got a lot of help, because what makes it funny is that most people have no idea. Everybody knows that the vaccine autism link was debunked. And if you're a smart person, you say, oh, that's been debunked, and there's hundreds of studies, et cetera. Debunked, debunked, debunked. What nobody knows is who debunked it or how it was debunked. And you can ask 1,000 people, and very few will know the answer to that. The answer is that it was debunked, such as it is, by the Institute of Medicine. And the Institute of Medicine is an organization in D.C. that most people think is a government agency. It is not. It is a totally private agency, private organization, and it is paid for its work. The government hires it often to do crisis management for the government, and pharma hires it often. And so in this particular case, to get to your question about how it's funny, is that the Institute of Medicine hired a group of experts to answer the question about whether any vaccine products could have any neurological impact, including autism, on any children in any circumstance. And they had closed-door meetings. And in these closed-door meetings, there's no white lab coats, no microscopes, no blood tests, no autopsy reports, no interviews with physicians who've been treating kids with autism, none of that. What there is a closed-door discussion about how they are going to say what they've already decided to say, which is that there's no link between autism and any childhood vaccine, and that it's debunked. And so the funny part is that they begin that meeting by being informed that everything they say there is confidential, nobody will ever hear it. That prediction turned out to be quite wrong, because some blessed person leaked the transcripts of the entire meetings. They were over several days and over several years. And so the funny part is listening to these revered experts of government navigate the one issue they're actually focused on, which is how will we say it? And their dialogue, which I'll share some with you later, is nothing short of funny. It's almost, if it was a Broadway play, the audience would sit there and laugh. And out of that closed door meeting and closed mind meeting comes one of the most significant damages done to the American public, which is the cessation of any government-funded research into, or any full-hearted and authentic government-funded research into vaccines and brain damage. So that's the part that's funny. It's funny what they do and how they do it.
I want you to read us some of that, Gavin. And I just want to point out that that meeting took place over 20 years ago. So for 20 years, we've been living in the shadow of this debunked theory, which cut off real authentic research, as you're saying. So it's sort of a tragic comedy. But interestingly, Gavin, you don't start in 2004, you actually start a long time before then. And so your first chapter is what's Agent Orange got to do with it? Talk to us about that, if you would.
Sure. Agent Orange, of course, should have nothing to do with childhood vaccines, but it has a substantial relationship in that the Institute of Medicine was also hired by the U.S. government to debunk the question of whether Agent Orange, which is a bioweapon used in the Vietnam War, whether it, a chemical weapon, pardon me, whether it had any impact on the health of many, many U.S. soldiers and their offspring. And so the Institute of Medicine used the exact same people, the same human beings, who they later used for vaccines, appear in the committee for debunking whether Agent Orange had any impact on health. And so they used the same people, the same method of promoting it after the fact for the same customer, the U.S. government. And all that differed is the toxin. They used the same language. And amazingly, when they later convened to talk about childhood vaccines, and some of the same people are on that committee, they pay homage to the Agent Orange committee by saying, hey, the way we did it in Agent Orange is we said it this way and we did it this way. And a lot of the language is quite the same. And so it's the relationship between the two is part of this answer to the question of who debunked it. I'm now talking about autism and any link to any vaccines. And how was it debunked? And why was it debunked? Those are three questions that most pediatricians couldn't possibly answer. Most members of the public, of course, couldn't answer. They only know that somebody used that magic word, debunked. And when you see how it was done in the case of Agent Orange and how it was ultimately itself debunked, you have a famous admiral who does a study for the Defense Department. And he's particularly, Admiral Zumwalt, it's a particularly personal story for him because he ordered the use of Agent Orange in Vietnam, and his son is one of the people who died as a result of Agent Orange. So he does a very profound and powerful public statement to Congress, indicating that there are, that the Institute of Medicine had done a terrible job of preventing people from learning the truth, and a good job of preventing them from learning the truth, and a terrible job of making it possible for veterans to receive compensation for what had happened to them as a result of Agent Orange. By the way, Agent Orange is a defoliant. It kills plants, and so it was often used to destroy jungles and to destroy crops belonging to the enemy. But of course, it also had a highly toxic impact on human beings, and that's how Agent Orange, gets there. And amazingly, it took the Institute of Medicine 22 years to get there. They did Agent Orange reports, high cost, high profit to the Institute and the people who served on these committees in 2006, 2008, 2010, 2012, and 2014. And over again, their conclusions from all that scientific study, and I put scientific in quotes, was that further study is needed. That tends to be how they end these committees. Right. Further study is needed. And so it's a real scam and involving Colleen Boyle and Dr. Frank DiStefano, they both also later were promoted, despite this thing being widely criticized. And then they ended up involved in doing the same magic for childhood vaccines. So that's what Agent Orange has to do with it.
Yeah, so it's so relevant. Thank you so much for explaining that. And then, Gavin, you go on to explain that that's not the only theories that this Institute of Medicine has debunked. You mentioned cancer from baby powder, Gulf War syndrome, silicon implants, Gulf War illness, anthrax vaccines, burn pits, SIDS, all debunked. Just give us a little bit of information on that, if you would.
Well, the Institute of Medicine, and by the way, if you see me looking down, I'm looking down at some notes so I get it right. In the case of Gulf War syndrome, there was a Guardian article, the Guardian newspaper in the UK, and it said, quote, "The common factor for the 275,000 British and US veterans who are ill appears to be a substance called squalene, allegedly used in injections to add to their potency. Such an action would have been illegal, putting squalene, because squalene is not licensed for use on either side of the Atlantic because of its potential side effects." Now, in fact, if you look on Wikipedia, it will say, and you ask about or inquire about the causes of Gulf War syndrome, you'll get the following response from Wikipedia. Attempts to link squalene to Gulf War syndrome have been debunked. Of course, you look at the citation and who debunked it? The Institute of Medicine. And everything you find is like that. They ignored studies where rats were given squalene and most of the rats died within 5 days. And they basically use every trick in the book to debunk these comments. And when they encounter information they don't like, they'll say things like this, quote, "The committee does not regard this particular study as providing evidence that the investigators have successfully measured antibodies," meaning they'll just hand wave a thing out of existence, and with the wave of their diplomas, a thing is just destroyed.
Yeah. So I love. So I want to just mention as we go that you have sort of how long each chapter takes. It's a nice, I love shortish books. This is not a long book. This is not over 200 pages. It's well under it. And it's got QR codes for all the citations. So you're not asking the reader to take anything on faith, Gavin. You give a QR code at the bottom of the page. So if the reader wants to look at that citation, she or he can just go right there and see if you are accurately referencing that source. But I want to go to the next chapter. Go ahead. Sorry.
I want to say, yes, I make the point early in the book that I'm not a doctor and I'm not opining on medicine or science. I'm a criminologist and I'm opining on crime, on cover up, on deceit, on bribery, on fraud, on all of the things that have gone on. And I definitely make clear to the reader that I am not looking for you to rely upon me for anything. There's 400 citations in the book, and they all can be gotten on your iPhone instantly. Right at the moment you have doubt, go check it right that minute. And at the beginning of the book, Mary, I say to the reader, I have a note that says, if there's anything in this book that you think is not true, put a big X through it. However, then right next to it, what you believe is true. Because without that second step, people tend to say things like, well, that's not what I heard. And then they just wipe away the reality of something that quickly. And so I encourage readers, put a big X through it. By the time you get to the end of this book, if you've got 2 or 3 X's, that's all right. That's 2 or 3 X's out of several hundred citations and references, and I can live with that. But you've got to tell me what's actually true at that moment and not just hand wave it away. You were headed to another chapter.
Well, I was just going to read the title of chapter 5, which I just love, Gavin. Deceptive, duplicitous, distorted, double-dealing definitions. And here you really start getting into the whole vaccine issue and show us that the CDC has just turned these definitions inside out at whim. I love the use of language there.
Thank you so much. I want to make a comment on the previous topic, which was the Institute of Medicine and all their debunkings, because a very interesting one to look at is SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. What's important about this is that they conclude that they have no idea what causes these sudden deaths in babies. They only know what doesn't cause it. And that's the same thing you'll see throughout this book with regard to autism and brain damage. They have no idea what causes autism, can't even imagine, but they certainly can point at what doesn't cause it, and it's any of those vaccine products over there. In the case of SIDS, the very definition is used to describe deaths that cannot be, where the cause cannot be discovered. So a baby cannot be diagnosed with SIDS. A baby cannot die of SIDS. SIDS is an umbrella term used when there is no explanation. So for the Institute of Medicine to say, oh, that thing over there that we can't define, that we can't describe, that we don't understand how it happens or why, that's not caused by vaccines. That is an example of how corrupt they are with regard to terminology, because SIDS, like SADS, which came up during COVID, that was sudden adult death syndrome. It was used for a while and then it was abandoned. It didn't gain any traction. But sudden adult death syndrome, the same thing. You can't die from it. You can't be diagnosed by it. It's just the term used when they have no other answer, or they're not willing to see the real answer. Now to your main question on the definitions. So this is the CDC's definition of vaccine prior to the change. Very simple. Quote, a product that stimulates a person's immune system to produce immunity to a specific disease, protecting the person from that disease. That's what you and I grew up with, Mary, believing that vaccines ideally make it so you don't get sick. Right. What they changed it to is a preparation that is used to stimulate the body's immune system against diseases. No longer there is producing immunity, no longer there is protecting the person from the disease. Now it's just what I read, that it's simply a product used to stimulate the immune system. Similarly, the word pandemic. The word pandemic used to mean, I won't even read it because we all know, it meant, a simultaneous outbreak of some kind of disease or virus that, caused, and this is a quote, enormous numbers of deaths and illness. That's what a pandemic was. What is a pandemic today, post-COVID? An influenza pandemic may occur when a new influenza virus appears against which the human population has no immunity. Nobody has to die. It doesn't have to be widespread. Nobody even has to be sick. That terminology of what we used to think a vaccine meant and what we used to think a pandemic meant, both of those died of COVID in 2020 and 2021, those definitions.
Well, and really, this sort of reminds us of 1984, Brave New World, where yes. Language just loses its meaning, right? I mean, it could be something completely different from what we imagine the meaning of the word is.
That's true, and it's certainly true with autism, because I encourage viewers to take a look at the Wikipedia page on autism. I think it's 12,000 words. It has hundreds of citations. And what you get by the time you claw through the whole thing is that autism is undefinable, and that lack of clear definition, obviously there's no blood test, there's no criteria that is uniformly used, but that lack of clear definition helps the powers that be. It helps the pharma companies, and it helps the government, because they're now able to point at something. And of course, when you have a spectrum. Now, we could use that word about anything. You could have a little mild flu, or you could die from the flu. That's quite a spectrum. In the case of autism, I have a section in the book called A Tale of Two Teenagers. And one of those teenagers is always home. It is never left unattended 24 hours a day for her entire life, 19 years old, cannot use the toilet, cannot feed herself, is wearing a safety helmet at all times because of self-harm. And the other teenager, also diagnosed with autism, is driving himself to school, attending college, and will eventually become the founder of a big tech company. And that's the spectrum. So when we say autism, the word, like the word vaccine, has come to mean there's no shared definition. So it's come to mean much different things. Then we add terms like severely autistic, because as you know, Mary, and I know, and most of your viewers know, severe autism is a profound disability to the individual, to the entire family. And whereas autism that is just defined by things like shyness or awkwardness, that's a totally different world. And so, of course, the Institute of Medicine and the old CDC and the pharma companies can say, you see that thing over there that has absolutely no shared definition? It's not caused by that other thing over there, vaccine, which also has no shared definition.
Right.
So it can never be resolved scientifically. And it's why throughout this book, I encourage people to use, and it actually comes from a paper, the PACE paper that you wrote so many years ago. I encourage people to use the term brain damage because that we know is caused by vaccines.
Right. Vaccine-induced brain damage. Just to this point, in one place where you're talking about the CDC's use of language, Gavin, you say, though I claim no medical expertise, I do speak English. And these 15,000 words were like a dictionary that's put through a shredder. I just love that image.
Yes.
Because so much of this is like it's word salad that literally feels like it came out of a shredder.
Yeah, that's from an old CDC page. I'm calling it an old CDC page because it's possible that the new HHS has already replaced that page, though I know it's still there. And that's a page that is 15,000 words, and it has the many cautions that people should be thinking about with regard to vaccines. Of course, nobody's ever read that page, and nobody can understand that page, and it's not understandable. It's impenetrable, and quite intentionally so. And you know, when you have, for example, I say in the book that no parent would let a stranger walk up to their child and inject them with something that they don't know what it is. And yet, all over America, at CVS and Walmart and Rite Aid, parents do exactly that. A stranger, a 23-year-old injector who might have been there for a week, injects your child with something that they don't know what it is, and the parent doesn't know what it is. Very few people know what the ingredients are, and does so without applying any of the 15,000 words of caution from the CDC website, asking when were they last vaccinated, do they have a flu right now, do they have a cold right now, do they have an ear infection right now, do they have any infection right now, how have they reacted to vaccines in the past. All of this that is critically important to know when you're injecting something into a child is unknown, basically.
There's another funny part I just want to reference. So at one point where you're talking about vaccines, Gavin, you say, there's a famous scene in Shakespeare's Macbeth that depicts three witches stirring a bubbling cauldron, chanting out the ingredients of their brew: eye of newt, toe of frog, lizard's leg, tongue of dog. I don't know why that play came to mind, but let's get back to vaccine ingredients. Formaldehyde, an established carcinogen, polysorbate 80, linked to infertility, potassium chloride, the final ingredient administered during executions by lethal injection, phenol, and it goes on. You bring humor to something that is actually not very funny, but the humor keeps us going. It makes the book so easy to read, actually, making its final points very, very clearly.
I'm real glad to hear that. And since you read a little portion of something, I want to read a little portion of that, because a lot of old-time vaccines were, pus from the hoofs of animals and then pus from people who were infected with things and what have you. But I want to just name quickly some old-time vaccine ingredients. Some of them were made by steeping the ingredients for years in a mix of ox bile and glycerin and potato slices. And I'm not kidding. They eventually evolved as science advanced. They evolved to include the following ingredients: vaccines: dried rabbit spinal cords, duck embryos, chicken blood, human bile, ground up rat spleens, and boiled pig skin. Now, why I put that in there is for the next sentence that says enough about the past. We've come a long way since then. Here are some of the ingredients in today's modern vaccines: gelatin from boiled pig skin, same thing I just read, chicken embryo protein, blood from the hearts of cow fetuses, human fetus DNA fragments, albumin from human blood plasma, oil extracted from shark liver, proteins from worm ovaries, and monkey kidney DNA fragments. That is in the vaccines that kids are getting today. As you know.
You can't make it up, Gavin. You can't make it up. It's just extraordinary. So I want to turn now to your chapter about how childhood vaccines have saved 150 million lives. So I'm in Washington, D.C. right now, and I went to the Senate subcommittee hearing, the permanent subcommittee on investigations yesterday, that Senator Johnson led, with testimony from Aaron Siri and Dr. Toby Rogers and a third Dr. Jake Scott. And at issue was this number of 154 million people's lives have been saved. And they didn't buy it yesterday at the hearing, but you don't either, Gavin. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I'll look down occasionally so I get the numbers right, but basically, everybody knows that tens of millions of lives have been saved from vaccines. It's one of those everybody knows, like everybody knows about autism and vaccines, et cetera. But there are many scientific papers and studies and reports that confirm that vaccines have saved 150 million lives, 154 million to be exact. And I want to start with the first study, which was done by the Imperial College London, and it was published in the prestigious medical journal, The Lancet. They say, I'm reading it here, vaccination has averted 154 million deaths, including 146 million among children younger than 5, of whom 101 million were infants younger than 1 year. Now, the next study is called the PATH Report, and that's 50 years of progress. That explicitly states vaccinations have saved 154 million lives since 1974. Problem is, we can't use that PATH study because it's based entirely on the study I just talked about, the Lancet study. But that's okay, because we still have the Global Health Security Agenda Consortium, which also confirmed 154 million lives. We can't use that one either, because that's also based on the first study I mentioned. But that's okay, because we still have the School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine report that says 154 million lives. But I guess we can't use that one either, because it's also based on the same study. So now we're left to rely upon the study in Nature magazine that says global vaccination efforts have saved 150 million lives in 50 years. Damn it, we can't use that study either because it's based on the same thing. So when you look at this and you find out how it's actually done, there's no worries, because the Global Alliance for Vaccines and the World Health Organization and the Vaccine Impact Modeling Consortium and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they've all done studies as well. Guess what? Same studies, same thing, and funded by those organizations that obviously have a lot to gain. And so when you look at how it was done by the Imperial College London, the same organization that did the following modeling studies. In 2002, they predicted 150,000 deaths in the UK from mad cow disease. The actual number, 177, not 150,000. The next year, they predicted 200 million could die from bird flu. The actual number, 280 over 6 years. They predicted 65,000 swine flu deaths. The actual number, 45. They predicted 55,000 deaths per day from Omicron. The actual number, 300. And all this was done by a guy named Neil Ferguson, Professor Lockdown, as he's known. And I mean, what you find when you dig into this, and you'll see in the book, all the QR codes are there, is that these taken for granted realities, like it's been debunked, or like the 154 million lives saved, are highly, they are subject to lots of scrutiny. And I want to just share one more thing, because when we ignore vaccine-related risks and deaths, as that report did, you're saying 154 million lives were saved, but you're not asking whether any lives were lost or damaged by vaccine injury, for example. There's a 7,000-word report that all those numbers are based on. They are the foundation for all of the studies that say 154 million lives were saved. I want to read you real quickly some words that never appear inside that 7,000-page report. I'm going to go through it fast. Adverse event, side effect, injury, harm, reaction, autism, myocarditis, brain damage, seizure, blood clot, neurological, simian virus 40, autoimmune, heart failure, neuropathy, cardiac arrest, sudden death, stroke, totality, convulsions. You get the idea. None of that is considered in their report, obviously.
Right. And this is why it is we talk about gaslighting, right? That oh, they're life-saving, but if you're injured or if you die, which they acknowledge can happen, but it's so rare, it's completely ignored in the numbers, in the narrative. It's not something that's acceptable in polite conversation.
Yeah, one more thing, Mary, before you go on, is that they wildly say in that study about the 154 million lives, they estimate that 5.7 billion, with a B, 5.7 billion years of what they call full health have resulted from vaccines, as if the vaccines don't just help with measles, but provide somehow full health. And so it's, with tetanus, they have a crazy number where they say some outlandish number, but I want to talk about tetanus for a second because so few people understand. It's not transmissible, of course. Right. In the United States, over a 10-year period, there were 13 tetanus deaths over 10 years. All of them were elderly people. In 2021, 42 of the 44 countries in Europe had zero tetanus deaths. That year, there were zero tetanus deaths in Australia, New Zealand, Canada. In all of South America and Central America combined, there were effectively zero tetanus deaths per 100,000 people. The point being that tetanus is simply not an important killer in most places in the world. And when people scream back and they say, well, that's because of the tetanus vaccine, then they have to answer the question, why do the 1.5 billion earthlings that are not vaccinated against tetanus have the exact same death rate from tetanus as the ones who are vaccinated? And that same equation I just did applies to measles. There's 9 million American kids not vaccinated against measles, and they have a zero death rate for almost every year, just like those who are vaccinated have a zero death rate for almost every year. And so, the whole thing, when you dig into it, it begins to fall apart. And what I've tried to do here is make a book that for people who know the reality, who can accept that government lies and that pharma, of course, lies, for them it will be cathartic. But who I really want it for is that this is a book that you can give to someone you love and care about who you've been unable to reach. Because I think this book takes an approach that is quite different from others and maybe can reach some people who otherwise will continue to take COVID boosters, for God's sake, as some few people still are. Few, but some still are.
I agree with that, Gavin. I think this is really a different kind of book on the same serious topic that we, Children's Health Defense, have published a lot of books on. But I do think because it's funny, but also really incisive and well documented, it will reach a new group of people. And I actually want to just cite from your sort of inscription at the beginning from Carl Sagan that says, it wasn't enough, Jefferson said, to enshrine some rights in a constitution or a Bill of Rights. The people had to be educated and they had to practice their skepticism. Otherwise, we don't run the government. The government runs us. And so this is really, your book is an invitation for people to have some skepticism about what the government and pharma and the media have been telling us for 50 years.
I think that's true. And by including Agent Orange and by including silicone breast implants and other things that do not have the emotional charge of vaccines for people, because vaccines is kind of like a religion for people. You're not allowed to say certain things, forbidden facts. By including those, what I hope to do is get some people across the finish line to recognize that, yes, the government really did lie about Agent Orange and really did lie about Gulf War syndrome and really did lie about burn pits in Iraq. And if you can accept that they do it once, then hopefully you can accept that they do it in other areas and be, as you said, skeptical. A quick comment on that 154 million lives. When you really dig into it, as I did, and I spent 3 weeks doing nothing but that 154 million number, and at the end of it, you come up with two possible options. One is that 154 million lives saved is a headline-grabbing claim bought and paid for and amplified by biased stakeholders in order to affirm and encourage and expand mass vaccination. In other words, the claim is propaganda and promotion, not science. Or the other alternative is that the number is perfectly accurate and verifiable, discovered by an unbiased, unconflicted group of geniuses.
I have to laugh at that one, Gavin. Yeah. Or perhaps that the geniuses made some really monumental mistakes along the way. I don't know.
Oh, that could be too, but it's a ridiculous. Those things are just ridiculous.
Yeah, and literally yesterday, Gavin, making it so real. Here I was in the Senate, and they were doing exactly what you've done here. Is just to take apart some of these ridiculous numbers that are propaganda. Another one that was quoted yesterday was 3.2 million lives have been saved by the COVID vaccine. Well, there's nothing to that. There's just nothing behind it. I wanted to take us to the IOM meeting, the Institute of Medicine meeting, because you do a really remarkable job of showing us that it has nothing to do with science. As you said, it's all about the messaging, or I think we could say all about how are they going to manipulate the messaging for propaganda purposes. But tell us about the actual meeting.
I will, and if you see that I'm looking down, it's because I want to read some content because it's so wonderful. First of all, that IOM is a private organization, as I said, not a government organization. The National Academy of Sciences, which everybody thinks is a government entity, is not. Also a private entity. And the guy who runs it gets $1.1 million a year, and they are funded by the taxpayers, but also by pharma and other organizations. And so when we finally walk into that room in the book, and we enter this closed door session in January of 2001, you don't need any scientific expertise or medical expertise to understand what's going on, because it begins with the following pronouncement. They say that the session transcripts will never be shared with anybody outside the committee and the staff. Blessedly, that turned out to be a bad prediction. But the second thing that was said by Kathleen Stratton turned out to be true. She says, quote, "The point of no return, the line we will not cross in public policy is pull the vaccine or change the schedule. We wouldn't say compensate the injured. We wouldn't say pull the vaccine, and we wouldn't say stop the program." A few moments later, Marie McCormick says, "The CDC wants us to declare, well, these things are pretty safe on a population basis. We are not ever going to come down that autism is a true side effect." So here you have it on day one. No matter what they may learn from then on, the decision has been made. And I want to read you just a couple of sections where you get the flavor of humor. In the very beginning, there's a Dr. Berg, and he says, "I don't know how long it will take us to figure out what the question is. I'm a veteran of one other panel that took 6 days to figure out what the question was. It can be a formidable issue. I don't know what the question is, whether it's MMR or whether it's the measles vaccine." And somebody answers, "The question is MMR." Somebody else says, "Are we to look at thimerosal?" And Dr. McCormick quickly answers, "Not this round." And that guy says, "Wait a second, not this round. But if we're going to look at autism and we have 3 candidates, how can we really fundamentally look at them in isolation? In fact, in the real world, they don't occur in isolation." And so this looks like they're about to get into a real discussion. But unfortunately, Dr. Berg interrupts again. "Excuse me, we're going to have a method for how we focus the question. This is one of the questions we need to focus on. How are we going to form the question? In general terms, what's the process for forming the question? How are we going to discuss it? I would like some reassurances about this before we get into the specifics of autism and MMR." And one of the other doctors says, "Why don't you make a proposal?" to that doctor. And he says, "Do we look at the burden of suffering? Do we look at squeaky wheels?" And then another doctor says, "I'm not sure I understand what you just said. Which information do you collect in order to determine which questions you address, or is it the other way around?" And the guy's answer is yes. He's asked a question with 2 options, and his answer is yes. I mean, here's another great one. This is Dr. Goodman, and he says, "In the end, the bottom line here is the only verdict that is of importance is whether we say a causal relationship between vaccines and autism is likely or suggested or unlikely or inadequate. That's the only metric. As soon as we start introducing other words and sort of sidestep causality, we use a term like intermediate levels of causality, I think we introduce confusion." Now, what's funny about that to me is the whole purpose is to introduce confusion. They're in the business of introducing confusion. And there's a great one where he says, like Shakespeare. Let me see if I can find it real fast. Damn it, it's not coming quickly enough. But basically, there's one where they each introduce different ideas, and somebody says, "I have it. I have a new idea to roll out." And he says, "The question is causality versus association. That is the question." And then the others begin to tear that apart, and they focus on this just outrageous constant use of words. And they say, one guy says, in the Agent Orange, the word association really means weak evidence of causality. And somebody says, why not just say that? I think we should just say it and use the word causality. In many lay people's minds, association means causation. In terms of the terms, let's settle on what we are going to call it first, and then we are going to talk about how we are going to put it into these categories. And I love the phrase, in terms of the terms.
In terms of the terms, yeah.
And eventually, Dr. Johnston, he's the one who says, inadequate to accept or reject. That is a statement. That is our statement about causality. We don't have good data that allows us to clearly say whether it's causal or not, so we'll just say that. Now, that guy, by the way, Dr. Johnston, also appeared at the secret Simpsonwood meeting. No. And, the leaked transcripts of that are also, fascinating.
And I would just point out, Gavin, that in some of these subsequent IOM meetings, and maybe even in this one as well, they acknowledge, well, we should do these studies. We need this data. But then they say, oh, but we don't have the data, so we can't come to the conclusion. It's also circular, and it all seems so intentionally obfuscative. They're not trying to come to answers. They're trying to obscure the questions and kick the can down the road, even though they know that kids are being injured every day.
Yes, very unfortunately true. And in the case of the doctor I was just talking about, he says at one point in the Simpsonwood secret meeting, which transcripts were also leaked from, he says the data are there and they won't go away. He's talking about the data that revealed that black boys were far more likely to be diagnosed with autism if they had the vaccines early. And it says the data won't go away and they're going to be captured by the public. He says, quote, perhaps this study should not have been done at all because the outcome of it could have, to some extent, been predicted. So here's a scientist saying we shouldn't have done the study because this is the outcome we knew we would get. I mean, it's really dark.
Well, it's very dark, and it takes us exactly, Gavin, to your chapter 20, Crimes and Criminals, Racketeering, Influence, Corrupt Organizations, RICO, and you are a criminologist. So tell us how you see all of this from the perspective of being a criminologist.
Well, they used, as pharma does, they use bribery, all variety of deceit, threats, intimidation, the damage to the reputation of people who question the orthodoxy that they've created. And the reason I see it as a RICO case, by the way, RICO is an area of law that, I'll just read it correctly, but it's an area of law that involves a criminal enterprise that has several elements to it. So in this case, we have pharma, we have individual doctors, we have pharmacies, we have the government, we have the large pharma organizations, and basically it does meet the definition of what's called the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act of 1970. I'll give you an example of it actually being used to be used to prosecute the mafia, but here's an example of it being used in pharma. A company that conspired to bribe doctors to prescribe its fentanyl-based pain medication to patients that didn't need it, some of whom died. What they did in that case is they, instead of paying doctors to go around and persuade other doctors to buy their particular pharma product, they paid doctors to write masses of unneeded prescriptions. It was called take the bribe and prescribe, and then send those prescriptions to specific pharmacies that were involved. And in the end, they did, this is what one of the people in that company, it was called Insys Therapeutics. He said, quote, we knew that if we got a patient on the drug, over time, they would become a greater revenue stream. The longer the patient stayed on the drug, the higher the dose that they were going to use, the more revenue it was going to be worth to us. Now, when he pitched that to his company, the CEO, the company's founder, slammed his hand on the table and said, "That's our next VP of sales." And indeed, right he was. That's exactly what he became. The other quick note on criminality is the issue of conspiracy. This term, conspiracy theory, is often used as a pejorative and is, aimed at people as if there's something wrong with theorizing about conspiracies, because the reality is that almost every product launch in America involves an element of conspiracy. It's secret how they're going to do it. They're going to discredit or harm their competitive products. They're often going to overvalue and exaggerate the value and benefit of the product they're rolling out, and they're not doing it alone. That is a conspiracy. And
Right.
Conspiracies happen every day, all day. There is nothing dark or special about it. And when people think, well, if you accuse somebody of a conspiracy, every military adventure, and movies are made about it, have the generals sitting around the table conspiring, if it's a wrongful military action, on how they'll do it and when it will be launched and how it will be kept secret and what they'll do to give people consequences if they reveal it. And so if that's done in another country, let's take the Nazis in World War II, that's a conspiracy. If it's done in our country for the Iraq invasion, which is widely perceived to be wrongful, that's a conspiracy. That's all conspiracy means. And so I've really tried to tell people in this book that the RICO case would be the way and the place to take on all the people who have shared incentives, hospitals, pharma, public health institutions, and officials, except that in my book, the reader is the jury. And the reader can decide whether these people all did this knowingly, which indeed you're very likely to conclude that they did.
So, Gavin, your last chapter is who to trust. And I do think that's the essential question for people, especially when it comes to, do they vaccinate against COVID or flu, or do they take their children to a pediatrician to follow the schedule? Tell us how you hope people will sort of figure that out.
Sure. I'll just read a little section of it because it's so short. I tell the reader that you've seen up close the process that ostensibly debunked the vaccine autism link. And it's your call if you can trust that process or the people who were hired to act it out. There's a whistleblower named Dr. William Thompson, a senior CDC official who admitted a cover-up, and he became a whistleblower. I'm reading from his quote. "I regret that my co-authors and I omitted statistically significant information in our 2004 article published in the journal Pediatrics. The omitted data suggested that African-American males who received the MMR vaccine before the age of 36 months were at increased risk for autism. I'm completely ashamed of what I did. And the higher-ups wanted me to do certain things, and I went along with it." Now, at the height of that cover-up, the director of CDC was Dr. Julie Gerberding. And after the good doctor left CDC, she became, wouldn't you know it, the president of Merck's multi-billion-dollar vaccine division. And Merck is the company that makes the MMR vaccine, if you haven't already guessed that. So it's your call, I say to the reader, whether you can trust the CDC or the FDA or Merck. And throughout the pages of the book, I've given readers the opportunity to check citations and consider original source material, including a lot of reassuring information about vaccines, because I put both in, that are advanced by federal public health. And I ask the question, who to trust? And I say, trust yourself. Trust yourself, because even though these 21 chapters have been fairly brief, you almost certainly have now read more about how vaccine harms were debunked than any doctor you'll ever meet, including every pediatrician. Trust yourself.
I love that, Gavin, because I think in this era of propaganda and narrative control in every way, it's just so important that we encourage people to trust themselves. We have to trust ourselves. There's no better source than trusting ourselves, because there are so many people with so many interests to persuade us of things that may not be in our interest. So I love that conclusion. And you've got some fantastic appendices here. Do you want to mention anything about them, Gavin?
Well, for early in the book, I make the point that I identify a bunch of vaccines that have been pulled off the market. And the reason I talk about those particular vaccines is that it is helpful for the reader, particularly the reader who is new to this topic, the kind of, your sister-in-law or brother-in-law or friend or neighbor who's resistant to the things we're talking about, and you give them this book. Particularly for them, I think it's very valuable to learn that it is not possible to say that every vaccine is the same. For example, today there are 6 polio vaccines. They can't all be identical. They have different side effect profiles. They have different dosages. And so there's a decision to be made here. If you want to vaccinate against polio, somebody's still got to make a decision about which one. And it is not possible to say vaccine safe, disease deadly. That's not true in either case, in every instance. And so if we can get readers to just understand that obviously the vaccines that were pulled off the market cannot be called safe. So and that's after millions and sometimes tens of millions of vaccines were administered. And the vaccines are not the same. The diseases are not the same, and the risk from them is not the same. And the children are not the same. And the products and the dosages are not the same. So clearly there's a decision to be made here. And people might like saying, well, let the government decide. But, most of us wouldn't let the government decide many other aspects of whether something is safe or not safe. I'll give you a quick example. Parents have a different view of risk when it comes to driving. Some parents will let their kids take the car and stay out till midnight, and some kids definitely won't be allowed to do that when they're 16 years old, for example. Some parents will encourage their kids to play football. It's good to be outdoors. It's a competitive sport. But other parents say, I don't want the head injury. And so, no, you're not going to be on the football team. Parents make decisions about riding a bicycle, going out in the neighborhood, walking to school. We don't want government making all of those. And yet it's as if the government is saying to a parent who's decided that their teenage boy won't play football, you have to play football. It's mandated. You have to let him go out on the bicycle at night. It's mandated. You have to make the decision to let him drive at 16. It's mandated. And so what I'm encouraging parents to do is to look at the fact that vaccines are different, the diseases are different, and the products are different, and there's a decision to be made there. And I don't think every reader of this book will decide against all vaccines, and I don't think every reader of this book will decide to take all of them according to the schedule put forth by CDC or the American Pediatric Society, is it, or Association, the APA? Yeah. So the point is to let somebody else make all these decisions. But the only place a lot of parents do that is when it comes to vaccines. And I want to share something very few people know. I'll just take a couple of diseases. Take polio, for example. What do you imagine is the number of polio deaths last year on the planet Earth? I'm not going to ask you to guess, Mary, because you might guess it correctly. But on the planet Earth, 8.5 billion people, the number of polio deaths last year was 0. On the planet Earth, the number of poliomyelitis paralysis was about 530 cases, meaning where the terrible outcome of paralysis actually happened. And 94% of those were vaccine-induced poliomyelitis. And the point being that we've been taught that there are these boogeymen. Polio just kills you the minute you get it. The fact is that almost 100% of people who are infected with polio have no symptoms. About 1 or 2% have symptoms that are like a common cold that go away in a week. And about 1% of those have paralysis, the bad effect that everybody thinks about. And so when you look at that, you now have a real question. Do I want the polio vaccine? Well, people who would yell back at me say those statistics you just gave about 0 polio deaths, that's because of the vaccine. But that cannot answer for the millions and millions of Americans who don't have it. You cannot have the same death rate for the vaccinated as you have for the unvaccinated and expect that that makes sense. And so when I looked at all the childhood diseases that are addressed in childhood vaccines, all of them have a survival rate for healthy children approaching 100%. All of them. And yet the CDC says about measles, it's incurable. And they say that to make it sound like it'll never stop. It'll go on for the rest of your life. Well, it actually is highly curable if you've got 7 days on your hands. For most people, that's the result of measles. But they say incurable, and they teach young people now, young mothers, the baby will have pustules all over their body. I had measles, of course. I had mumps. I had chicken pox. Speaking of mumps, by the way, the overwhelming majority of people who get the mumps were vaccinated against mumps. And the CDC uses the term the majority to imply 51%. It's 94%. And so the fact that the mumps vaccine doesn't stop mumps, the way they respond to that is they say, I'm almost quoting it here, scientists do not understand why this is the case. Well, could it be that the mumps vaccine doesn't work? Could it be that? I mean, this is the reality when you really learn about it. What I've said here, when I've said that the number of polio deaths on the planet Earth was 0 last year, that's a forbidden fact. That's a bad thing for me to say, because what you're supposed to say is polio is the greatest accomplishment of all time. Yeah. The polio vaccine stopped it. And as we know, that's just not the case. And so if you have a healthy child, and you have to decide whether you want to give them the RSV vaccine, for example. What are the consequences of the bad side effect is paralysis and a bunch of other bad side effects. What are the bad side effects of getting RSV? And you compare the two. And that's what this book is encouraging people to do. Use your risk evaluation method, not CDC's, because all CDC says about everything is every vaccine for every child, every day, all the time, no matter what.
And that may be changing. But Gavin, I want to point out that there's a very special offer going on right now that people can download your book for free, Forbidden Facts, off of Amazon. Is that right?
It is. And it's for CHD and CHD viewers. And of course, anybody else, I'm happy about it. Yes, for at least the next week. The ebook will be free for anybody on Amazon. Yeah, I'm happy about that.
So we really want people you really want people to have access to this information, Gavin, right? That's the main objective here, is to make sure that people understand that autism vaccine link was never debunked, that these people behind closed doors sound preposterous, and people need to trust their own judgment.
It's true, and I encourage the hardback just because it's so easy to use those QR codes. But even in the ebook, we put a little icon that you can click on and get it. But why I really like the hardback, and I don't get any money from it, by the way. And my purpose here is to get people to get hold of this and give it to people they love or care about who you haven't been able to reach. Because if you give the COVID vaccine to your 12 or 14-year-old son, and you continue boosters, that is a very, very serious mistake. And that's one of the appendices in this book is hundreds of studies about myocarditis and pericarditis. And I mean, one of the saddest appendices in the book is 550 cases of young people under 45, sudden death, sudden cardiac death. Yeah. And we're seeing it now like we've never seen it in our lives. Yeah.
No, and Gavin, I agree with you. I encourage people to buy the hardback. It's not a big book. It's you're going to want to have it as a reference. You're going to want to be able to keep it. But if you want to reach out to people more easily, you can send them a link to Amazon. You can tell them that you learned about it from Children's Health Defense. This is really going to be a great addition to the work that probably most of the people are already familiar with. Gavin, any other things you want to tell our audience?
Just that I'm grateful. You know, you mentioned yesterday was a very big day, and I saw you there. It was heartwarming to see you in the background there. And you know, things are clearly changing, but it is a true it's like a war of ideas, because when people talk about vaccines and they say things like, I believe in vaccines, which one? The ones that are taken off the market? Which one of all these products is it that you believe in and invest in? And what they really mean is that they're not willing to learn the individual information about the products. Every parent who's ever stood in a supermarket or a pharmacy and read the tiny font on some product before giving it to their child was doing more than too many parents do before they let somebody inject worm material and cow material and all of these chemicals into their children, having no idea what the ingredients are or what they might do. And so I think things are changing, but when things change, there's a lot more artillery fired at people who are skeptical right now. And I'm sure it will continue to get worse. It's going to be a bumpy ride for a while.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's going to be a bumpy ride. But again, I so enjoyed this book, Gavin. I'm so grateful to you for doing it. And really, people, you're going to laugh out loud with this book. And it's not easy to laugh out loud in this issue, but you will literally be laughing out loud because it's just so entertaining. So, Gavin, I'm grateful. Thank you so much.
I'm glad. Thanks to you, Mary, for everything. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
All right, we are live, so can you tell everyone your name, please?
My name is Dawn Wells.
Dawn, and what do you do for a living?
So I used to be a social worker for the local regional center here in the Central Valley. The name of it is Central Valley Regional Center, and there's 21 regional centers across the state of California, and this one serves 6 counties, the local Fresno County, Madera County, Visalia area, Tulare County, Kings County, Merced, I think, and Mariposa County. So it was a pretty large organization that I was working for, serving individuals and their families with special needs.
And so what happened? They introduced the COVID shot, and then what?
So not only did the regional center request everyone to get the COVID shot, they also had vaccine clinics on the work site. And so in December of 2021, I was put on unpaid leave because I wouldn't get the vaccine, and then later dismissed from my job. But they timed it exactly with Christmas to make it the most devastating for people, to pressure them to get vaccinated. Along the beginning, when the first shots came out, they were offering people money to take them. So they were offering $50 for each shot if people would go get them. And they offered them on site at the workplace, trying to get people to take them.
$50?
Yeah. I didn't think that $50 was, a good price to sell my soul for. So I declined. I'm a pro-life mama, I've always been pro-life. My dad was almost aborted in the womb. And so the whole thing about fetal cells being used in the vaccine manufacturing process, it just really made it so I just didn't feel like it was the right thing to do. So I put in a vaccine religious exemption, and they initially allowed me to have a religious exemption for the masking, but they didn't extend it to the vaccination.
So what kind of things did they say to you when you said, I'm not taking the shot?
So I was basically told just that they're not going to allow any religious exemptions. It's really kind of hard because social work as a profession was started by Christian women, and now as it's evolved into more of a communist profession, they've really pushed Christian women out of the social work profession, and we're not wanted there. There's a huge agenda in the field of social work to bring in a lot of negative content into people's lives. So it's a difficult profession to be in as a conservative and as a Christian.
So what do you do now?
So I struggled a lot when I lost my job because I didn't know what that was what I wanted to be when I grew up, right? So I didn't know what to be. So I decided to stay home and homeschool my kids and volunteer with Moms for America. And I'm in the middle of opening a store in the center of California, North Fork, California, and it's called At the Heart, and we're gonna sell gifts and ice cream. So I'm just trying to reinvent myself, you know, now that I'm not who I thought I was. You know, you put so much of your identity into your profession, and it's not really who you are as a child of God.
So what's Mums for America? What does that even mean?
So Moms for America is a national organization. I run the local group Central Valley Moms for America, and there's a ton of information if you go to momsforamerica.us. They have webinars, they have information about the Constitution and the Founding Fathers, and right now I'm going through a great training on communism. It's called The Naked Communist, and it's a multi-part series online on Zoom. So they just really teach you why things are happening like they are happening today, what protections we have from the Constitution and the founding documents, and how to become active in your own community.
Well, thank you for telling us. Is there anything else you want to add? Sure, sorry.
So I just wanted to make sure that moms know that it's really important for us to stand up as an example for our children. That's why I got involved with Moms for America, is to show my kids how important it is to get involved, and I'm doing it for them, you know, and for my grandchildren, and just really want everyone to know that job loss isn't the end of the world. You know, as devastating as it feels in the time, you know, God has a different calling for your life. If that door shuts, it's okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for sitting and telling us your story.
History doesn't wait. This is our moment to rise, unite, and reclaim our children's health.
Join us here in Austin, Texas this November at the Children's Health Defense Conference.
In the wake of unprecedented medical overreach and censorship, the world is waking up, and people like you are leading the way.
We're at a turning point in history. With the pandemic behind us, our fight for freedom and health has reached the global stage.
This is our moment of truth, and we're ready to seize it together.
And Children's Health Defense has been at the forefront of this charge. Our 2025 conference brings together the leaders, visionaries, and warriors who made it happen.
Meet the parents whose lives were forever changed, and hear from doctors who risked everything to speak out. Stand with those who refused to be silenced.
You are going to hear from world-renowned speakers, doctors, and frontline leaders driving the medical freedom movement.
Discover real-world solutions grounded in science, integrity, and human rights.
Join the discussion to talk about vaccines, informed consent, parental rights, and so much more.
And you'll of course hear from your favorite CHD personalities, sharing the latest on CHD's research, litigation, and outreach.
And while you're there, soak up the energy, culture, and music of beautiful Austin, Texas.
Whether you're a parent, a practitioner, or a medical freedom advocate, this is your call to action to protect what matters most.
Be part of the movement that is rewriting the story for generations to come.
So please join us.
Join us.
Join us. Let's make history together in Austin.